So their legacy grows, and Charlie's will too, beyond his wildest dreams. And where Charlie is right now, he is fine. I picture God asking him for his autograph.
Welcome, friends, to this week's episode of Left Reckoning. My name is David Griscom, broadcasting on the road, but I am joined, as always, by a familiar face, our good friend, my co-host, my good friend, and buddy, Matt Leck. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing good, David. Good to be with you this evening.
I just realized I'm excited to be here and chatting with you, Matt, but we got a lot of difficult topics that we're going to be getting into today. We're going to be talking in a little bit with Dr. Tom Alter, who we talked about on the Sunday bonus episode just the other day, because he was let go by Texas State University for engaging in free speech, protected free speech. We were able to interview him about what happened, his case, and he makes a very impassioned plea for the importance of standing up for our basic constitutional rights. Really was a great opportunity to have him on the program. There are links below for people to get involved. This is something that people need to make a big deal out of, because those who want to take away our rights in this country, they do depend on silence. We're also joined by Brian Meir to talk about Bolsonaro, who has been sentenced to 27 years in prison for his role in the coup. And we're also joined by Tamanisha John to talk about what's going on in Venezuela and neocolonialism. So a jam-packed full episode, and I'm really excited to share all those conversations with y'all. But Matt, before we get into that, we do want to talk a little bit more about the events of last week with the Charlie Kirk assassination and what that means for free speech in this country, because we have seen a lot of kind of downstream effects, let's say. And maybe to open this up, I want to share a quick story with y'all that happened in Texas, in Lubbock, actually, at Texas Tech University, where a young woman, a student there, was, mocking people who were holding a vigil for Charlie Kirk. Something that, might be offensive to some folks, might be seen as rude or whatever, but is
David, sorry, is it against the law to offend people now?
Well, yeah. No, I mean, this is what we're getting into, because what happened here is pretty extreme. So this person, was basically mocking, people mourning the death, the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and they were arrested and charged with a misdemeanor and jailed, which is extremely atypical for something like this, right? This is literally having someone having the book thrown at them. They were also expelled from Texas Tech. And we bring this up because, look, things like this happen in the U.S. There's unfair sentencing, police overreacting, all this. But the governor of Texas got involved, and he posted the picture of this young woman being arrested and said, this is what happened to the person that was mocking Charlie Kirk's assassination at Texas Tech. Fuck around and find out. He also had noted, definitely picked the wrong school to taunt the death of Charlie Kirk. Thanks, Texas Tech. Now, again, the fact of the matter here is that it is not illegal, and you do not have to show deference to Charlie Kirk. You might think it's distasteful to mock somebody or something like that. But the fact of the matter that we have, one, the police breaking typical norms when it comes to holding somebody in a jail cell. And then the university disciplinary procedure, which I won't comment on. But the fact of the matter that the governor of a state of 30 million plus people is posting this person's photograph online, and kind of justifying this very clear police overreaction, to this person, is, I think, a very chilling moment in this country's history, in the state's history, because it is the governor, like the people who are supposed to be the watchdogs, the defenders of Constitution, all these kind of things, basically mocking and saying, for people that we don't like, for people engaged in speech that we do not like, we're very willing to see all those protections disappear.
And of course, the right has always been ready for that stuff to be thrown under. This is an 18-year-old girl who said, allegedly, "Fuck y'all, homie dead. He got shot in the head." Now, you can say what you want about that string of words, except that it is simple assault? Like, what the fuck are we talking about? How is that assault to say words? That's crazy.
What happened was she flicked somebody's hat off their head afterwards, right? Again, this is the point here. So this is somebody having the book thrown at them, and even getting the charge is one thing. On top of it being jailed, right, is a complete overreaction. This is atypical, 100%. And these are the kind of things that we are seeing: targeted attempts by law enforcement, celebrated by major government officials. And this is the kind of thing that we've seen all throughout the weekend. I'm sure people have seen the reaction to people like Pam Bondi, people in high positions of our federal government, basically acting like any kind of criticism or mocking, or like whether or not you think these things are tasteful or distasteful is secondary. These are fundamental rights that you have in the United States of America. And there is no rule or law that says that you need to show deference to a right-wing podcaster, right?
Yeah, or that you need to get the state involved because someone was rude or something like that. Like, this is, and I would just say, like, have a little bit of reflection to why there is such a, there's a reason people are reacting to this way about Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk spread a bunch of hate. This is the most, the example they're quibbling with, that he only was talking about 4 specific black women when he said you don't have the brain power. Please, yeah. I'll leave that to JD Vance. Charlie Kirk, after Nancy Pelosi's husband was beaten, got his brains beaten in with a fucking hammer, said a patriot should bail that guy out. Like, there's a reason people aren't ready to say, like, join in with this vigil shit for this guy. And it might be distasteful. It's probably bad manners. It's not assault. It's not something to get the fucking FBI involved in. That's ludicrous.
No, I mean, and this is what we're getting at here is that we're not seeing an overreaction is in general is like the wrong terminology, because we are seeing people in positions of power in the government trying to encourage all kinds of activities, be they police overreactions like what we saw in Texas Tech, to people getting fired, doxxed, harassed from their jobs. We've seen, for example, people who didn't even say anything about Charlie Kirk having their jobs called and people, wanting to fire them because they got the wrong information. I mean, there is a really, really chilling movement in this country to try to police speech. And again, you can find things, you can feel whatever way you want about these kind of things, if it's tasteful to make a joke about this or that, right? That does not change the fundamental fact that in the United States of America, we have freedom of speech, and there is no rule or law or social political custom that says that saying this or that about a major right-wing podcaster after their passing, is a criminal offense. It's truly absurd, and people should take it very seriously. Quoting him. Right. I mean, the New York Times obituary, which was, I would say fairly even handed, you have people like calling and flipping out about the magazine. Is it surprising that the right is being hypocritical on this issue? Probably not. Should people be alarmed and engaged and paying attention to what's happening? Absolutely. And on that, Matt, I mean, could you talk a little bit about this schism amongst the right with Candace Owens?
So that's sort of what I'm very interested in this, because Candace Owens probably best set up to take on the mantle that Charlie Kirk did. They were close friends. They did not have the same public posture towards Israel. I would say Candace Owens had Candace Owens did some programming. I appreciated her having Finkelstein on talking about Gaza, and then few months later, she's talking about how the problem with the Soviet revolution was the Jews. So this is someone who I would say, I have no problem saying, I think she's an anti-Semite. But anyway, she is making an accusation that I would say I don't think has anything to do with, and maybe she's implying it, I'm not sure. This is for her next few months of programming. I don't think this discussion has anything to do with the actual shooting of Charlie Kirk. But she is emphasizing that Charlie was pressured in the final months of his life by supporters of Israel, in particular, billionaire named Bill Ackman. Ackman is somebody who has been very active in politics in the make everyone support Israel side of things. We've talked about him on this program before. And I think it's pretty notable that Candace Owens is going with this conversation instead of the let's hunt all the leftists who laughed at Charlie's death thing. And so I think this is a good schism. But I also think, like, while I don't trust Candace Owens typically as a witness, I think she's telling the truth about this. And if she's not, I look forward to Bill Ackman and Candace Owens litigating this in court. I'm sure Candace Owens' lawyers are pretty busy these days. But anyway, here's Candace Owens talking about a meeting that I believe the Gray Zone reported on in the Hamptons with a bunch of conservative influences, including Charlie Kirk, where Charlie Kirk got dressed down by Bill Ackman for some of the things he's been saying.
In the Hamptons, and he had more than one event, but he had essentially what was staged, an intervention was staged by Bill Ackman, because Charlie's rational thoughts about Israel were a no-no. This is not the route that you should be going on. And Charlie was surrounded by his friends, his quote unquote friends. Bill Ackman was very upset, and threats were made. That is what I am told, and I will tell you that I am very happy for Bill Ackman to dispute this narrative. In fact, he was asked to dispute this narrative. Max Blumenthal went out to him today, and Bill Ackman came back and said, I have receipts I can show you. And he did not provide the receipts. This is not how it went down. I know it went down this way. I'm waiting for one of them to go on record and to say that it didn't go down this way. It was at this time that Bibi Netanyahu was called and Charlie was invited to Israel. This was an under duress situation, I would say, because I've been in these situations before. When I started asking very sensible questions about Israel, as someone who had dedicated her political life to supporting Israel, many times alongside Charlie Kirk, I was met with the very same pressure. And just like Charlie was being invited to Israel, I was invited somewhere else. And when this arrived to me, it felt like a threat. You know, I got to tell you that. It felt like a threat, like not like, hey, come here. And
so you get the point here. She also says that Bibi offered a large amount of money to be infused into TPUSA, and Charlie Kirk said no. Now, I will say I'm not in a hurry to credit Charlie Kirk in death with a pivot he failed to make in life that he frankly should have, because he clearly knew better. There's a clip of him on PBD talking about ethnic cleansing. And Charlie Kirk, he's a big boy, or was a big boy. He should have known this, and he didn't actually split with Israel. That said, I absolutely 100% agree that this meeting took place the way that Candace Owens says it is. Now, Ackman has a giant tweet where he sort of corroborates that this sort of summit happened, but that it was actually very friendly and everyone had a good time. I don't believe that. And I just think it's interesting to see this schism happen, because I think what's happening with like the Jack Posobiec and Mike Cernovich types, where they're going on CNN to say, we need to attack the left. We need to go full court press and go after our enemies. It's sort of how America lashed out at Mexico prior to the Civil War because of the divisions within. There's a lot going on the right now, particularly on this Israel thing. And it is true, even though I don't think he was killed for this reason, that Charlie Kirk was at a crossroads, or it was a sort of linchpin in terms of the stance on Israel by the American right. And I think it's also true to say he didn't have a tenable position. Like, Charlie has been recently like talking about going to Christian holy sites and feeling like the Holy Spirit, and that's why he supports Israel. As opposed to like 4 years ago saying he just loves Bibi Netanyahu as a leader. That's the type of leader we need. Like the sands are running out of the Israel support hourglass on both sides. in this country. And I will just say, like, I'm glad Candace Owens, even though I think she is anti-Semite, I'd rather her saying this in this moment about the types of discipline being imposed by powerful people on conservative talkers than saying, everyone find who at your local university said something bad about Charlie Kirk and tried to get them fired. But I'm curious your reaction, David.
Yeah, I mean, I find it hard to take Candace Owens as being particularly credible on this. I think there's been some folks who have wanted to kind of paint this picture of a turn, especially a lot of that was coming out before they knew who the shooter was, right? But I do think that, you know, it is very interesting to see this division amongst like these kind of influential figures. I mean, Candace Owens, as you're saying before, is probably, you know, the largest right-wing commentator, and certainly is amongst those now after Charlie Kirk's passing, right? And yeah, I think that like those divisions have sort of weakened their ability to kind of crack down in a kind of like unified way on folks. But maybe we see this one a little bit differently. I mean, like, I think that they are not unified enough to be effective in the way that some of them want to be. I think that we're certainly seeing that from people like in the Trump administration, people flipping out about Pam Bondi. I don't think that they have the organizational capacity to maybe do what they would have wanted to do with this. I think that their ability to kind of like connect this to maybe organizations that they wanted to persecute, I think they've probably run out of time to do that. I don't think that they're not going to try though. And I think that that's what worries me about kind of talking about, like, I think it's fair to recognize some of the weakness here, but I do think that like there's going to be a lot of attempts to kind of get scalps, let's say, you know, to get people fired, to come after folks, and they're testing this country to see how far that they can go. And maybe it will be a state by state thing, a region by region thing to see how effective they are. But everything that I'm seeing right now, I think that a very, very chilling war on free speech is coming. And this is, I think, a very kind of loud version of it, because I think the reaction and the frustration and the shock that many people are kind of feeling about this like major news event is kind of giving them a little bit of a cover to sort of test the boundaries of what they have. But I think that it's just going to be, I think that they've seen some signals that at least in certain areas of the country, in certain tactics, like it can be, they do have a lot of ability to restrict speech in this country.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely do, and I mean, already have been, right, this entire term. I just see like JD Vance saying the nation lied about Charlie Kirk. And I'm just like, what are you going to do? First of all, how many times can you apparently go to war with the submerged NGO state? Like, I thought Elon Musk undid all of that stuff with Doge. And like the only person they've named in particular is Soros. Like, good luck. Yeah. I'm sure he's not prepared for that.
It should be noted is not a financial backer of the nation.
Right.
Just, you know, I mean, yeah, because they're pushing, and something like that. You see, that's a wink to, I think, a larger narrative that they've been pushing. But like, there is no organic opposition to the right in this country. That it's all kind of like this clandestine funded thing from certain figures. Like
individuals, like I said, like I think definitely there's going to be scalps taken, to use that horrible metaphor. I just think I don't think it's deliberate enough to really like the real stuff that's going on with the sort of control of the media is billionaires buying CBS.
Yeah, 100%.
And putting Barry Weiss in charge, right? Like, but this is a good time to, if you have a sensitive position, use a burner account or something like that. Because like, I do think right now, I haven't seen the right this sort of insane. It reminds me of the post when you read about John Brown and how Confederates got were like sort of really riled up after the John Brown raid. That's what this feels like. And that is definitely a dangerous time. It's just how, like, when it's being translated into attacking people because they quoted Charlie Kirk incorrectly, and saying like actually hate speech, a lot of things that actually go against their long-term project of like saying there's no such thing as hate speech, and you should get fired from your job for having political opinions. Like, I don't know, you better be pretty confident that liberals never get back in charge of this stuff, because like, you've really undone a lot of that discussion.
Well, I mean, and maybe to get us back to some of the other things we'll be talking about today, I mean, here in Texas, they passed a lot of laws about free speech on college campuses, and those were basically set up to make sure that Dave Rubin and Milo Yiannopoulos, or however you say his name, were allowed to be weird on campus. And well, now that's a big problem because the government wants to crack down on people opposed to the mass killing of Palestinians by Israel. So they've had to literally undo laws that they just passed like a couple of years back. So yeah, no, I mean, will the hypocrisy cost them electorally? I don't know. But I do think that before we can even think about electoral questions, the immediate concerns are about making sure that there is a full-throated defense of our basic political rights in this country, because whether or not they're successful is secondary to the fundamental reality that they are trying. And the fact that they are trying is cause to be worried enough on its own. So we'll be talking about that right now with our conversation with Tom Alter. We'll also be joined by Brian Muir talking about Brazil. Very exciting news there. And we'll also be talking a little bit of Venezuela towards the end. So enjoy the rest of the program, folks. Welcome back, Left Reckoners. David Griscom here, and we're going to be talking today about something that we talk about a lot on this program, which is free speech in the state of Texas. And we have a guest on the program, somebody whose work I greatly admire, and I wish we were having on the program to talk about other things, including his excellent book on the history of Texas radicalism. But today we have to talk about something pressing and current. Tom has been let go from his university work. Tom, could you tell everybody what has just happened to you?
I have been summarily terminated from my tenured position teaching history at Texas State University. The grounds and the letter from the provost were for jeopardizing the health and safety of the university community. And this relates to a online talk I gave the Sunday before last. The time's kind of blurred together since this has happened. On online Sunday morning, as part of a revolutionary socialism conference. It was on my own time. I gave that talk from my office here at home, and I did not do it in any capacity as a employee of Texas State University. That was exercising my free speech.
Yeah, I mean, Tom, could you just talk about, for people who are less familiar with like a university system, as a tenured professor, I mean, what, rights are you supposed to enjoy with that? What is the reason for that system? And also, if you could get into a little bit this distinction between, representing the university or speaking as a private citizen.
Yes. I was granted tenure based on my academic scholarship, which was the book that you referenced, Toward a Cooperative Commonwealth, as well as other articles I have published and reviews of books, interviews with other historians. Also based on my teaching performance, I've received positive teaching evaluations throughout my time at Texas State, which began in the fall of 2017, and also my service to the university. So based on all of those factors, I mean, tenure is a long process. It's a 6-year process. It's basically, are you measuring up to get tenure? And then what the tenure is supposed to be, give you an amount of academic freedom to, I mean, not to then neglect your duties as a teacher and as a scholar, but to allow you to pursue topics of history without facing any type of rebuttal. And if you are found in violation of that, something like neglecting of your teaching responsibilities, no longer publishing and no longer engaging in the academic field of history, there at Texas State, there is a formal review process of that to remove someone from tenure. And that was not followed at Texas State.
I mean, so I mean, beyond, you know, just like your personal experience with this, I mean, what kind of precedent does this set? I mean, people have seen some of like the articles about your statements. You know, it really is nothing that is like outside of the realm of norms for, like, you know, speaking at a conference like that. I think it's 100% your free speech right to be able to engage in that kind of speech. What kind of precedent does something like this set, not just for, you know, Texas State University or Texas universities, but just, you know, higher education in general?
Yes, it sets a very chilling and dangerous precedent. Not only, like you said, not only at Texas State and across the state of Texas, but across the entire country. Here, in an unprecedented manner, without following any means of due process, university president has terminated a tenured professor. And so I heard, I mean, just faculty at Texas State, they're frightened. When I talked to a reporter for the student newspaper, the University Star, yesterday, there were other faculty members that spoke to him, but they all did so anonymously. I mean, that right there speaks to something that here, this is freedom. It's supposed to be freedom of the press, freedom of speech, and that tenured professors don't feel comfortable talking to the student newspaper. They feel they have to do so anonymously. And then it sets a precedent from around the country. If these norms and procedures are not going to be followed, it's very chilling.
Tom, I'm not trying to butter you up, but I'll just say, you know, I'm in Austin. I know a lot of people who are engaged in political work in the state, and people who have taken classes with you speak very highly of you. And again, this is somebody who's not even associated with Texas State University. That's just how far your reputation goes. You know, one of the things that is kind of shocking about this isn't something that is originating with, I don't know, like a student complaint or something like that. This is an outside individual who is kind of, you know, watching videos of professors, trying to catch them in something that they can make into viral content, and with the intention, in my opinion, of, you know, probably trying to get people fired. I mean, could you talk a little bit about, you know, this aspect that you're now directly experiencing of, like, you know, universities and administrations, you know, trying to like put the interests or, you know, basically listening to a bunch of people from outside of the system, outside of the community, you know, and using that to make serious decisions like this.
Yes, this is another troubling aspect of my particular case. And then also what's happening to educators, I mean, all around the country and in Texas in particular, where one of the things we're trying to teach critical thinking and riddle reading skills and analytical thinking. And that's one of the things I'm trying to help my students understand with, yes, we're very aware of like social media and with the kind of some like toxic culture that can exist on the internet, and trying to help students get through all that and understand, to formulate their own opinions and realize what true and accurate sources are. And here is the university kind of capitulating to a self-described fascist and anti-communist cult leader with very anti-Semitic statements. So that universities are supposed to be places of knowledge and learning and sharing ideas. It's not that everyone's supposed to agree, but you're supposed to be exposed to those different types of ideas. And that now it's like, nope, we must capitulate to this particular outside force, which has very extreme, undemocratic views. I mean, that's fascism is not democratic. I mean, any means whatsoever. And then that's what has, because they cited the conference recording. I mean, what happened exactly, don't know. But they did cite the conference recording. And so and we know what the conference recording is referring to. So that here that the university is what's supposed to be a bastion of learning and knowledge, a liberal institution in the classical sense of liberalism that includes what we can consider traditional conservatives and liberals, a place of sharing ideas. But now here it's capitulated to basically an online fascist grifter.
Yeah, I mean, just for the audience, for people who watch our Sunday episode, we talked about this person. We've covered them actually a few times on this program because this isn't the first time they've engaged in this kind of stuff. And just to put some meat on it, this is somebody who said, "quote Everyone who died in the Holocaust chose to die in the Holocaust before they were ever born because they, quote, collectively wanted to understand the experience of ultimate oppression." Following that quote, they said, "That's why Hitler went to heaven." So I just want to make it abundantly clear that like these are the kind of figures who are being placated by decisions like this, and I think it brings up very serious questions about our democracy across the country, but specifically in places like Texas.
Yes, I mean I've read that quote a few times now, but just even hearing you now, I mean, it just still gets me every time I hear it or read it. And this is where, like you say, the placating this type of a speech. I mean, so that speech is seen as free speech, but myself and talking about a speech about organizing and like a hypothetical situation to defend the people that person is attacking, that appears to have crossed a line. And that's what's troubling. I mean, we want to talk about empathy and helping people and looking out for each other and having a true democratic space on universities.
Yeah, and again, like people can go check it out for themselves. I think that what you're talking about is something that is 100% like you're right to be saying it, and the way it's been painted is, I think, has been completely ludicrous. I think it is very chilling. I think that's why there's been such a response from many people in support of you. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit more broadly about, like, this is not just one isolated event. This is something that we've now seen a kind of snowballing effect across the state when it comes to either university officials cracking down on free speech in their universities, to also just like government officials, like the governor of the state of Texas, the attorney general of the state of Texas, tweeting, mocking people. There's a young woman at Texas Tech who the governor was showing tweeting out photographs of her being arrested. I mean, we're reacting to like extreme overreaches from the government in this kind of gleeful way. And then again, as a citizen, as an educator, what is your kind of read on what we've been seeing over the past few months in the state of Texas when it comes to what I would categorize as a very severe free speech crackdown?
Yes, it is very chilling. I mean, elected politicians, no matter what party they represent, are supposed to represent the people of Texas, or federally, represent the people of the United States. And so that means protecting free speech, right to assembly, free press for everybody, regardless of what you believe of their opinions. And so now, that they've gone to this like selective free speech, selective protest is protected. It violates the very principles, of what this country was founded on, flawed as it was. But there was the promise of improvement and going forward, and it was something new at the time. Tomorrow's Constitution Day. It's time to defend the Constitution. Particularly talk about the Bill of Rights is what it needs to be defended. And so, just thinking that those elected officials took an oath to defend the Constitution, and that includes the Bill of Rights. That's the Bill of Rights. That's the part we really want defended. And to see that's like you said, talking with the governor, putting the post about a woman being arrested for exercising her free speech and mocking it. That is it's chilling conduct by elected representatives, whatever their political persuasion to be. And this is something different. Yes, we have disagreements. That's what a democracy is supposed to be. You have disagreements, and you open debate and discussion, and then you decide and elect it, and you win elections. But then once you're elected, you don't then use that authority then to then squash dissent, which is what we're seeing now. We're seeing a squashing of dissent, which is it's. And that's why I believe, I mean, I'm not, like I said, I'm not the only case out there. I've become very public because of what happened, and it's the attention that it's drawn. But that's why I believe this case has drawn so much attention, because people see it for what it is, and it's very chilling. It's like, whoa, if this can happen to someone who had protections, the protection of tenure, not that it gave me free reign to do whatever I want. That was never the case. I mean, Texas State History Department has very clear and robust guidelines for keeping tenure. And so, like, if this can happen, then what is the state of our democracy?
I think that's a really good point. I mean, both inside and outside the university, I know plenty of people who are engaged in different kinds of work, without like outing them. I know a lot of people are very afraid to not just speak their mind, but to just kind of engage in like everyday activities, because they're afraid of these, kind of attacks on their employment and also on their person. I think the environment in this state is becoming very, very stifling for free speech and for free expression. And I was curious, as a historian, if you could maybe tie this into any other events that we might have experienced in the state of Texas, because this isn't the first time that we've seen these kind of crackdowns before. It is something that we thought maybe we had buried, but I'm curious your perspective on that.
Yeah, I mean, sadly, there's a long history of repression in the United States. There's fabulous moments of triumphs of democracy and social movements and winning of rights, but throughout it all, there's been a history of repression, and that it's something that's just kind of people put back because we are images of the United States and what we think of our country. So yes, it is something we thought that we hopefully had left behind, but clearly it hasn't. I mean, you've seen from the Black Lives Matter protest, from environmental activists. Going back, I mean, specifically, you can go to the 1950s, during the reaction to the civil rights movement. You had the state of Texas passed a anti-communist law, where if you were a communist, you could not run for public office or hold a government job. That eventually was the Supreme Court eventually came in and got rid of that. But going back throughout Texas history, I mean, you go to the populist movement with the People's Party, a genuine working class and middle class movement of people looking for true economic reform and around political and economic demands brought together poor black and white farmers, and which was kind of the last true threat to the two-party system we've had in the United States. And that was based in Texas. Texas. I mean, Texas is understandably thought of a place of social conservatism, but it's been a place of economic radicalism, working class based economic radicalism. And that's where the true threat comes, when they're like, oh, you're talking about undermining their profit driven system. And so here you have the People's Party using the measures of the ballot to bring about a radical change in the economic system of the United States. And it was severely repressed, violently repressed. So you had assassination of newspaper editors, public speakers, beaten up by the supporters of James Hogg, the Democratic governor at the time. And then you get to the socialist movement in the early 1900s, the Socialist Party of Texas. Again, I sometimes ask my students, I was like, when you go think about the early 1900s and what state do you think had the largest socialist party? And they put four good guesses. They say like New York or California or Massachusetts, places we think of like traditional liberal states. And I was like, those are very good guesses, but they're incorrect. And those states did have large socialist parties. The largest, Oklahoma, was number one. No, and Oklahoma was number one in terms of actual members, like card carrying members of the Socialist Party, and percentage of its population. Number two was Texas, having the largest Socialist Party in the early 1900s. And that was percentage of a population. And then when it comes to actual numbers, it was about 5 or 6. So, and that became a real challenge. And they were changing the politics of the time when most of them were focused on prohibition. But these poor farmers were facing real economic challenges. And so they made land reform the issue. And then they too were repressed. The leader of the one of the leaders of the Socialist Party, an Irish American, Tom Hickey, was kidnapped by Texas Rangers and federal marshals, held incognito where no one knew where he was for a few days. The Rebel, which was the socialist newspaper at a little old Hallettsville, Texas, was the third largest socialist newspaper in the country. And it was the very first newspaper repressed by the Espionage Act. And so, like, stifling of free speech. So unfortunately, we've seen this in Texas before, and across the country. And like you said, we'd hoped we'd kind of left that behind and we'd move forward to a less repressive environment. But it seems that there are those seeking to bring that back.
No, I mean, it's very worrying. And as you know, I highly suggest people read your book on this. And I would also just note that one of the things that was notable about the repression against the Socialist Party is that it was swift, and it happened very quickly. And I think that that's something that we should all pay attention to right now. I wanted to ask before we let you go, Tom, and I really appreciate your time. And I really hope that maybe once things cool down a little bit, we can get you on go in depth into a lot of these other topics as well. But are there any ways that people can kind of look out for you and support you during this process?
Yes, my union has Texas State Employees Union. I'm also a member of the American Association of University Professors. Has put out a petition, as well as the organization I'm a member of, Socialist Horizon. They both have petitions helping with my case. There's a GoFundMe it just feels weird. I mean, there's so many other causes that need donations too, but that sadly, unfortunately, that's become like my family's lifeline now, being cut off from employment. So yes, I mean, there's the petitions, GoFundMe. I tell people, join your union. That's what you can do. We need to empower ourselves. So join the union part of. So for my my former co-workers across the state, employees of the state of Texas, join the Texas State Employees Union. If you're in academia, join the American Association of University Professors. And just if you've thought about joining a protest and getting out there, but you're thinking, okay, there's other people taking care of that, I support them. It's time to organize and to join in the struggles, whether it's for helping trans liberation, fighting against ICE. If Palestine's dear to your heart, I mean, get out there and oppose this genocide. Just participate, and it's time. This moment has been thrust upon ourselves. I mean, whether we think about things in history and we read about the civil rights movement, we read about the triumphs and tragedies of the labor movement, and we read those histories and we're inspired by them. And we're like, wow, what would it been like to live in those times? Well, it's upon us now. And I don't think the people that were a part of those movements, historic movements that we look to and admire, necessarily thought that they were going to be part of history. And then this was their time, and what they went through would be something that we'd be talking about 100 years or so later. We're at that moment now. And so it's time to become actively engaged and to use our rights. Because I used to always say, you got to use your rights or you're going to lose your rights. I was using my rights, and then here I've lost them. So now we have to not just use them, but we have to actively defend our rights. That's what we'll say.
Well, Tom, thank you so much. And, it's very inspiring to see you taking on this fight head on. We'll have links below for ways for people to support and look out for you. And, always welcome on this program. We hope to speak to you very soon.
Thank you so much. It was great being on the program.
Welcome back, Left Reckoners. Well, Is it Bolsonover? We're joined by our good friend and buddy, Brian Muir. Brian, thank you so much for coming back on Left Reckoning.
Thanks for having me. It's always fun coming on here and talking with you, Dave.
I mean, this is an interesting one. Why don't you tell us this big news that we've got regarding Bolsonaro, but also a lot of his cronies?
Well, this has been going on since April 2023, when the Parliament opened an investigation into what they were saying was at the time a military coup attempt, which failed on January 8th, 2023. They spent months investigating. They produced a 3,000-page document full of material evidence, screenshots, emails, screenshots from WhatsApp chats, emails, witnesses, Bolsonaro's aide-de-camp, or like personal attaché, Lieutenant Colonel Mauro Cid, turned state's evidence. And that ended with a recommendation for indictment of 33 people. So then the next step was the federal police, based on the recommendations from the Parliament. They opened their investigation. They spent over a year investigating, and they came up with a 1,000-page final report, focusing more on what they felt was like the most important evidence. During that time, they found more and more evidence. They conducted a series of raids with search warrants and found, for example, that Mauro Cid had deleted all of his emails, but he hadn't emptied his trash folder when they seized his personal computer. And there was a lot of damning evidence in there. And then they found a handwritten notebook by General Augusto Heleno, one of the other indicted figures. He's a really nefarious figure in Brazilian history. He goes back to the military dictatorship, and he was also the commander of MINUSTA's military operations during the Cid Soleil massacre in 2004 in Port-au-Prince. He had kept like a spiral notebook with his notes about all the plans for the coup that they found when they went into his place, because he's like 77 years old or something. He's old school. He had it all written down on notes. And then, so they produced their report recommending the Attorney General's office to indict. The Attorney General's office then opened its own investigation based on the previous two investigations. And I think it was the beginning of March, the end of February of this year, it produced a 272-page final document formally indicting Bolsonaro and 31 of his cronies. One person was taken out of the investigation due to analysis by the Attorney General that there wasn't enough material evidence, just hearsay. Okay? So these people were broken up into 4 groups, I believe. And the first group to go on trial in the Supreme Court was the group that's called the nucleus of the coup. These are the 8 people who led the coup d'etat plan. And so this wasn't just like Donald Trump telling his followers to run to the Capitol or something. This started in 2021 after an investigation was opened up into death threats against members of the Supreme Court and whatnot. They started getting worried about losing the elections. And so they developed this plan to use, with business elites and whatever, to use social media to help develop a narrative that the electronic voting system was flawed. The same system that Bolsonaro did not complain about after he was elected president, right? That it was flawed, and that they were the communists were going to steal the elections, okay, by hacking into the voter system, the electronic vote system. Now, this is a system that's been in place since 1996. It's very efficient. It's won praise around the world. It's been copied in other countries. And there's never been any documented case of hacking into its system, because all of the ballot boxes are separate from each other. They don't link together. So the absolute worst that someone could do is perhaps, it's never been done before, but maybe hack one ballot box. You know, it's impossible for a hacker to go into the entire ballot system. So during the lead up to the election, Bolsonaro then held a 1-hour press conference broadcast abusing his power and harnessing the state television network to broadcast live a 1-hour speech in which 100 foreign diplomats were present in the presidential palace, in which he made a series of accusations against vulnerability in the voting system and claiming that if he lost the election, it was because there was fraud without providing any proof. That's the moment, based on that one event, the electoral court afterwards, after the elections, declared Bolsonaro ineligible for 8 years for running for office. So that happened immediately after he left office. During that period between when the election took place and when he resigned 2 days early and fled to Florida, there was a series of meetings with high-ranking, the commander of the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, in which Bolsonaro and his vice presidential candidate, who was former defense minister, General Walter Braga Neto, asked them to get on board with an auto coup to keep Lula from taking power. We now know that, and they also reached out, we know from journalism and stuff, that they reached out to the US and Russia to see if they could get help for that. And both countries declined at the time. But we know now that the commander of the Army refused to get on board, and the Army is like twice as big as the Air Force and the Navy combined. But the Navy commander agreed to go along with the coup. So he's one of the defendants that was just sentenced along with Bolsonaro, right? So that led to the 8th of January. Do you got a question first? I mean, it's such a long story.
No. I mean, yeah. I mean, I just want to kind of make it explicitly clear as we get into some of the more recent events that, like, I mean, this is a full on coup attempt. This isn't just like, I mean, not to, you kind of have to talk about it compared to the U.S. January 6th. I mean, this is like, I'm talking to military officials. There's a plan. We're going to try to seize, certain sites and refuse the election results here. It's beyond just like, oh, I have an inkling or a desire for this to happen. These are people who are engaged in the actual groundwork of planning out how to effectively do this.
Yeah, exactly.
And they some of them are stupid and kept fucking notes and deleting shit, but this was a genuine attempt.
You just froze up, but I understand the sense of what you said. I think it's my side, my computer, but that's why I'm not laughing as much, because it looks like you said something funny about how stupid they were. But they had a written plan on all the steps that they were going to take. And that included a group of military special forces, which they labeled Operation Green and Yellow Fist. And their role was to assassinate Lula, assassinate Vice President Geraldo Alckmin, and assassinate Alexandre de Moraes. This is all written down. They're documented meetings between Bolsonaro and his officials and people representing this group of special forces. And it's been proven that they were surveilling Lula and Alexandre de Moraes and Geraldo Alckmin. And there's actual intercepted WhatsApp conversations in which they're saying, we know where he is. Do you want us to take him out? About Alexandre Moraes. And someone tells them, no, hold back, stand back. And so this is all documented. It's not a case of like one plea bargain testimony or something like that. They have 70 terabytes of evidence, including all of the chat conversations and emails and all this stuff. And so on January 8th, it as laid out in the plan for the coup, the plan was to create confusion in the capital and force Lula to declare a state of siege. So even though the army general, the head of the army wasn't going along, there were lower level officers who commanded bases and things like that who were going along with it, including 3 generals who were just sentenced, But
And Brian, I just want to remind some folks of this, and you can add some light here. Is that one of the things that was kind of shocking about the Bolsonaro administration was that he kind of brought the military into the government in a way that kind of broke with Brazilian political norms, right?
exactly. Like it's the first time since the dictatorship that, for example, the justice minister was a member of the army, the head of intelligence. Well, there's a department called the Cabinet of Institutional Security, which oversees 16 government secretariats, including intelligence, ABIN, which is the equivalent of Brazil's CIA. And that was General Heleno, the same guy who was taking written notes, writing down, he's got a written notebook planning out all those things, not very cloak and dagger. But so then on January 8th, the idea was to pressure Lula to declare a state of siege. What that does is it turns the security of national security over to the military. And at that point, they were going to arrest Lula, Vice President Alckmin, and several Supreme Court justices, and they were going to declare that the elections were null and void and that they were going to rule the country until new elections could be scheduled. This is what they said in 1964 during the U.S.-backed military coup. We're going to take control of the country until elections could be scheduled. And they finally took place in 1989. The coup was in 1964. So there was a full-blown coup. And on that day, different from January 6th in Washington, in addition to the riots and breaking into buildings and everything with police opening the doors for them, there were 17 high-tension towers sabotaged across the country, causing blackouts in different places. And then in the lead up to that day, a man who had been camped out in one of these protest camps in front of the army base in Brasilia was caught trying to drive a gasoline truck with a bomb attached to it into the airport to try and set it off on Christmas Eve. There was a mob that attacked the federal police headquarters with Molotov cocktails and burned cars and buses in front of the federal police headquarters. And the day that Lula and his wife came for his certification that would enable him to take office, which is a ceremony they have called the diploma ceremony in Brazil. On that day, they attacked his hotel and they were throwing Molotov cocktails at his hotel and stuff. So it was a different level of coup attempt than what you had with Trump in January 6th, which is why it bothers me to see the media making this false equivalency, because then some people might think, oh, it was just a bunch of people high on meth protesting or something, whatever it was in the US, it was a little more complicated than that. And since Brazil,
I think this is a really important.
Go ahead.
I really want to highlight this because I think this is a really important point to make as abundantly clear as possible. Is that, really what this was a full-on coup attempt. So you could talk about how effective or not it was. Thank God it wasn't effective, frankly. But the idea, if you break the law and you do it in a clumsy way, that doesn't mean that you're, immune from prosecution over it, right?
Yeah, imagine if the U.S. just said, well, it's only attempted murder, so anyone who's been tried for attempted murder can just go home because they didn't actually do it. It's just freedom of speech. You could talk about your plans to murder somebody and buy a weapon and, shoot at them and miss them, and then it's not attempted murder because freedom of speech. That's basically what some people are saying about this, the sentence against Bolsonaro. But
let's get this up to the sentence, yeah.
Okay, so all right, so it was 5 crimes, attempting a coup d'état. It's just called in Brazilian law. It's called coup d'état. It doesn't matter if it's an attempt, if it's successful or not. In fact, if it's successful, then nobody ever goes on trial. So obviously, coup d'état is a law. Damage to property or inciting damage to property, like a kind of a law equivalent to racketeering, which is forming a criminal organized crime group. Damage to historic monuments, and attempting a rupture from the democratic rule of law. Those are the different crimes that they were convicted of. And they range from 2 years for Mauro Cid, the guy who doesn't know that you have to delete your trash folder, return state evidence. He's got 2 years of house arrest, ranging up to 27 years and 3 months for Bolsonaro. I think the second smallest penalty is like 16 years for the former intelligence chief, Alexandre Ramagin, because he resigned from the federal government like 6 months before the coup. So they said that he wasn't involved in all of the stuff that the other people were, because he, left early.
Well, I mean, well, let's get into, before we kind of talk about the kind of broader reaction to it. I mean, this is something that's most likely is going to be appealed, and there'll be kind of additional processes. Is that something that you're kind of expecting to kind of just play out, while they exhaust their options? Is this like a kind of final moment here, or do you think that there's more to come?
This is a final moment. They had 5 working days from the day the ruling was issued, which was last Thursday, which means they have until tomorrow at the end of the day, if I'm counting correctly. No, maybe Thursday at the end of the day, to submit 2 types of very minor appeals. The first kind of appeal is called a motion for clarification. And all that this does is allows them to alter sentences and alter fines if they can prove that a mistake was made between the arguments of the 5 justices and the final ruling. Like if the math doesn't add up, because each of the 5 crimes has a different prison sentence. So if someone calculated 5 years and 7 years and 3 years and 4 years, whatever, and the final number's wrong, then you file a motion for clarification and correct it. It doesn't have much power above and beyond that. The second type of appeal is called a motion for review. And the most that could do would be to push the trial up to the full plenary body of the Supreme Court, which has 11 members. However, for that to happen, precedent and law, specifies that you need at least 2 dissenting opinions in the ruling by the first Supreme Court panel, and there was only 1. So that's probably not going to happen. So once those appeals are filed on Thursday, the court has a period of up to 60 days to respond to them and issue the terms and conditions of the arrests. And that's it. So it looks like Bolsonaro is going to be in jail. And in the last couple high-profile cases, that turnaround time was much lower, more like 15 days instead of 60. So anywhere from between a few weeks from now and 60 days from now, it looks like 62 days from now, maybe. It looks like Bolsonaro is going to be in jail. Wow. And his sentence calls for 8 years behind bars before he can get any kind of parole or house arrest transfer. Wow.
Well, obviously a big moment for Brazil. Personally, I know for myself and Matt, it feels fairly big. We've been following this story since Lava Jato, and I wanted to kind of talk about that a little bit because, I can hear folks, I've seen folks, say things along the lines of people were upset when Lula was being kind of persecuted by the Brazilian justice system. What makes this different, Brian?
Yeah, it's 2 different cases. That's what makes it different. The only evidence they had against Lula was 1 coerced plea bargain testimony. And remember what the charges were for him, right? The charges were that after he had left political office, years after he had left political office, he had received free reforms and an upgrade on an apartment that he had purchased, that his wife had purchased, in exchange for some kind of very vaguely defined influence peddling since he wasn't in office anymore. So first of all, he was a private citizen when the alleged crime took place. That alone should have been enough to not enable it to go to court. Secondly, they could never prove that he owned the apartment. In fact, the proof came out that it was owned by somebody, by the construction company still that built the building. There was never a moment when he or his wife had owned that apartment. Third, the MTST broke into the apartment after he was arrested and filmed and streamed everything. And none of the reforms that the prosecutors claimed took place. They said an elevator had been installed because it was a 3-floor apartment in a kind of crappy building. There's no elevator in there. There was no nice furniture in there or anything. Like, none of the reforms, they prevented the journalists from entering the apartment for a reason during the whole trial, because none of the reforms they claimed it happened would happen. Finally, it was illegally forum shopped to a district where no crimes that he was accused of had taken place, in Curitiba, just because it was this U.S. asset named Sergio Moro, who'd been working closely with the Justice Department. They lied in order to justify transferring the case out of the state of São Paulo to the state of Curitiba. They claimed that this apartment deal was tied up in this money laundering scheme involving Petrobras, State Petroleum Company. 3 days after the case was transferred, they removed that charge. Nevertheless, the Guardian's Dom Phillips spent 2 years lying that was still something that Lula had been accused of, that was part of the charges against him, and other newspapers as well. The Guardian wasn't just Dom Phillips. Anyone who wrote about it for the Guardian during that period, the article had to include the lie that Lula had, was being accused of involvement in a money laundering scheme. Right. So first of all, the crime itself was frivolous.
So, I mean, if I'm hearing you right, though, Brian, so basically, the argument is like, hey, if you're saying that this was politically motivated, can you make the same arguments about this Bolsonaro case as folks like you and others made about the Lula case, showing that, it was spurious, that there was, all of these kind of like false allegations and corruption. There's a kind of a responsibility on somebody saying that, oh, Bolsonaro is going to prison. It's just like the Lula case. Well, can you poke holes in the case? Can you expose those kind of things? Like, that is a challenge that I would throw down at somebody, right?
Yeah, you froze up a little bit, but I think I get the gist of it. I think my computer's
just so you know, it's all good. We'll get the whole thing, so don't worry about that.
All right, excellent. So, you could make the argument that because Lula's case was politically motivated, Bolsonaro's case is also politically motivated. You could make that argument, right? We know that the U.S. Department of Justice was involved in the Lava Jato. That's a fact. That's a matter of established fact, which seems to suggest it was politically motivated. We don't see any involvement or proof yet of any foreign government involved in this case against Bolsonaro. So there's a different element regarding foreign interests in the current case. But you could make that argument. The issue is just, what's the proof, though? And remember that 3 of the 5 justices, right, who ruled on this case also ruled to put Lula in jail. And 2 of them, because Alexandre de Moraes came in 2017, the 2 of them that were there longer also voted to impeach Dilma Rousseff, right? So the only evidence, the main evidence of them being involved in politicized cases and stuff is against the Workers' Party, not in favor of the Workers' Party, even though they were appointed. 2 of the justices, of the 3 who voted to imprison Lula, 2 had been appointed by the PT, but the PT always used strictly technical criteria to appoint Supreme Court justices until this time around, after Bolsonaro tried to stack the court with far right-wing ideologues. Then he put 2 allies in. But the old-time judges who voted to imprison him, they weren't allies. They weren't connected to the Workers' Party or anything. And then I guess another factor against this, it's all just politicized, is to remember that the PT opposed Alexandre de Moraes' nomination to the Supreme Court, whereas all of the Bolsonaro-allied Congress people and senators who were in office who are now trying to fight to get Bolsonaro out of jail somehow, they all approved his. Because the Supreme Court justice goes to a vote by Congress and the Senate. The Senate approved, all the conservatives have approved his nomination, and he's not a leftist of any kind. There's one guy on that court who you could say is a leftist, and that's former Maranhão Governor Flávio Dino. He was the Communist Party governor of Maranhão. The rest, even Cristiano Zanin, Lula's other appointee, he's a social conservative. He's voted against abortion rights and marijuana legalization since he's come into office. He's pissing a lot of people off at Lula for nominating him, you know?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, you know, in the last few minutes that we have here, I want to kind of zoom out a little bit then, you know, and talk about the reaction. I mean, you know, Bolsonaro lost convincingly that election. That's why he tried to steal it. But there is still a segment of like the Brazilian population that supported him and that far right vision. I mean, what has the reaction been from the right so far? Have they kind of pushed themselves, you know, try to create distance between them and Bolsonaro? What is the case here?
Okay, well, 43% of the population thinks that Bolsonaro has been unjustly convicted. These are his hardcore fans, and these are the people who are constantly bombarded with the exact same kinds of bot messaging campaigns that you see in England going on right now on immigration. Same tactics, same accounts with like in Brazil would be like a Brazilian flag with like 30 followers. You know, in England, it's an English flag. In the U.S., it's a U.S. flag. Or
an Israeli flag.
Well, you see in Brazil too, the Brazil and the Israeli flag. They're using them both together. And now the U.S. flag too. But it's just the exact same algorithm manipulation by these fucking far-right billionaires who are trying to take over the world. Favoring these kind of far right wing voices, pretending that there's a freedom of speech issue at stake, pretending that their platforms are a democratic commons where everyone has freedom of speech, that algorithm manipulation doesn't affect freedom of speech, which we know it does. They bury all of the serious, they leave a few token left accounts popular to try and pretend that they're platforms for freedom of speech, but they bury most of them. I mean, you look at a respectable news organization, observatory of the media, like Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, they never get more than 1 or 2 likes for their articles on X. You know that they're shadow banned or it's manipulated somehow. And so those people who fall for all of that stuff, who believe all the memes and everything, they're brainwashed, and they're complaining, and they had a protest the week before the trial that New York Times pretended was this really massive protest that was only a quarter of the size of Bolsonaro's rally on the same street in Sao Paulo in February. It was like 42,000 people. That's pretty big, but it's not mega big. It's not like color revolution size or anything. Bolsonaro brought 220,000 to the same street in February. So 6 months ago, the percentage of his supporters was more like 47, 48%. It's dropping down. 2 weeks ago, 2 parties left the government coalition to join with Bolsonaro's Liberal Party, saying that they were going to try and push for an amnesty law, right? The news this week is that they're backing down from that. The center-right parties are backing down from amnesty. So it's bizarre to see a New York Times article come out yesterday talking about amnesty for the first time when it's been in the Brazilian news all year. But that looks like it's losing steam right now, right? It looks like...
So is there a movement that you think might be able to pick up the mantle? Maybe not successfully enough to win the presidency, but, you know, will Bolsonaro's politics outlive his freedom? Definitely.
And the guy who's going to pick up the mantle is most likely going to be São Paulo Governor Tarcísio de Freitas, allegedly connected to the Rio's right-wing paramilitary militias. Never lived in São Paulo before he became governor. He was like Bolsonaro's number 2. And since he's taken office, police killings have gone up by 61%. Rapes have gone up to record high, mostly of children under the age of 14. Femicide has gone up significantly. The murder rate's gone down 3%, but the national rate has gone down 6%. And it's all because of this like tough on crime, war on crime shit, the people sitting in, out in the country somewhere, out in the middle-class suburbs get terrified thinking about crime and want to vote for the guy who declares war on crime, although his actions are increasing crime. But he's the guy.
Yeah.
And if the elections were held tomorrow, he'd make it to the second round, and he'd be like 5%, 6% below Lula. But remember, Lula was up by 5% before the final election and only won by 1%. Because the far right has tactics to manipulate social media to create this surge in the last week before the elections.
Mm-hmm. No. I mean, I think it's definitely something that we'll want to be watching closely. And I think we're running a little low on time, and I think we'll just have to have you back on sometime soon to maybe talk more broadly about Brazil and Lula. But since this is about Bolsonaro, this kind of nebulous figure that we've been talking about for a long time, I mean, I just want to give you the opportunity to kind of, give us your thoughts on Bolsonaro. I mean, this is somebody who's had a large effect on Brazil, a large effect on global politics even. And I was just hoping that maybe you could leave us with your categorization of what the Bolsonaro period has been like for Brazil and the globe.
Well, I'll just say the following. I'll quote a song by Raul Seixas, who is a great Brazilian rock artist whose lyricist was Paulo Coelho, the mystical author who lives in Switzerland in the 70s. He had a song called The Fly in the Soup. And one of the lines is, if you kill me, another one will take my place. And that's what's happening. This is like an international virus, this far-right social media, tech fascist brainwashing experiment that's going on. And Bolsonaro is irrelevant because someone else will take his place, even though he's in jail. That's my opinion. Now, will he be able to pull it off in next year's elections? I don't know. But I think these people, until countries start realizing what a threat social media companies can be to their democracy, this is going to keep happening everywhere. Everywhere that doesn't regulate it, social media companies is up for this kind of, I would call kind of like a fascist virus spreading among its citizens.
Well, Brian, you're probably one of the best people for people to follow, to keep up with what's happening in Brazil. How can folks keep up with your work?
You're freezing again, but I will just say thanks for having me on. And I think, like I said, people are stealing our wires, our internet cables out in our neighborhood.
Brian, how can people keep up with your work? Where can they follow you?
I'd appreciate it if everyone could check out my Substack, which is called D Lincoln Brazil with a hyphen, D-Lincoln Brazil. And on Twitter, Brian Meir, Brian at Telesur, Brian M at Telesur, I guess, English. I don't remember. But I'm on there. You can find me. You can find me on there easily.
He's easy to find. We'll have all the links below.
That's about it for now. My Telesur reporting on the news program from the South. Those are the three things I do mostly. A lot of my articles appear in Counterpunch, and I write for Fair sometimes also.
Okay, we'll have links below for all of that. Brian, really always great speaking with you.
Welcome back, Left Reckoners. And joining the program once again is Tamanisha J. John. She is an assistant professor at the Department of Politics at York University. She's got a new piece at the Black Agenda Report on a pair of strikes that the U.S. military has carried out, first on September 2nd and then more recently on September 15th, against vessels they say were suspected narcotics traffickers in the Caribbean, destroying the vessels and murdering, I would say, 14 people on board of those vessels. Tamanisha, you have this piece here, which is titled, and we'll have it linked in the show notes, The Historical and Contemporary Role of Neocolonial Caribbean Governments in Supporting U.S. Militarism and Imperialism in the Region. Before we talk about some of the history that sort of preceded this, what's your reaction to these strikes?
So when the strikes first happened and they posted that video that I think it was Marco Rubio and then Trump posted on Twitter, at first it was like, is this real? Like, did anyone hear about it or anything like that? And so initially I was of two minds. I believe that the Trump administration would actually do an action like that. And two, I was wondering, well, if the Trump administration did do this action, where are Caribbean prime ministers in condemning it or confirming it or investigating it? And so when the communications director in Venezuela came out and saying it was AI, I always took that to mean Venezuela is putting that narrative out there so that they can somewhat stall and do their own investigation versus, directly engaging with the United States. And that turned out to be what it is, and it is true. We also saw that when two bodies from that first explosion washed up on the beach in Trinidad and Tobago, their prime minister came out and said that they're not interested in any investigations or in examining the body or in identifying the people because they agree with the United States that cartels should be targeted in the Caribbean region. And so just sort of the confluence of all of these factors made it clear that the U.S. would be bombing boats in the Caribbean that they say are Venezuelan narco traffickers, and that they would have a complete almost silence from Caribbean governments whose waters the bombs would be occurring in.
And can you let's go back before we get to some of the contemporary, like you alluded to, responses by Caribbean governments. Can you just define for folks what neocolonialism is, and maybe talk about the 1983 Grenada invasion as a precedent to this?
Yeah, so in my Black Agenda Report piece, I think that a lot of times people take neocolonialism to mean that there are governments who have these external influences within them that sort of guide and determine policy. But how I view neocolonialism and how I've studied it to operate in the Caribbean is neocolonialism is a function of imperialism, wherein you would have governments that are reactionary in nature choosing to actively align with imperialist foreign policy. And so it is not the case that the government necessarily needs any sort of direct external direction in the types of policies that they assume, but they align with imperialism in the hopes that they, could gain investments or could curry favor with a stronger imperial power. And so when we look at the Caribbean region, for instance, in my piece, I looked at the 1983 invasion of Grenada because that was the last time up until this point that the U.S. has directly engaged in covert military action that they say, yes, this is us doing this in the Caribbean region. And in 1983, you had a lot of Caribbean governments. And I think that in my piece, I look at Eugenia Charles, who was one of the most vocal proponents of the invasion, that essentially pushed for increased U.S. militarization in the region, even prior to the assassination of Maurice Bishop. And they said, oh, we need the U.S. military here because we need to guard ourselves against Black power and against communism. And the U.S. sort of like waffled about. And then, of course, when the revolution in Grenada happened, then the U.S. took those concerns more seriously and increased militarism in the region. However, because the majority of the population in Grenada actually agreed with that revolution, it wasn't an easy way, or there wasn't an easy way for the U.S. to just go in and do regime change. And so what they did was they set up all of these different apparatuses. They conducted training exercises in Puerto Rico so that when Maurice Bishop ended up being assassinated within his own country due to those internal contradictions, they were easily available to go invade. And I think that those dynamics are very important because I think for over 7 years now, the U.S. has been trying to push regime change unsuccessfully in Venezuela, meaning that there hasn't been this massive, civil war, civil protest that could, topple the government in Venezuela. And so now what you see the U.S. doing is amassing these forces in Guyana, now outside of Trinidad. And so, again, that looks to me like they're prepping for more direct confrontation after having less success with regime change pushes. And with Marco Rubio as the Secretary of State, they can be more bombastic in their actions.
Yeah, our sort of initial reaction was this seems to be looking for a war with Venezuela. Is that broadly how you're interpreting this?
Yes, I do view it as the US is trying to engage in sort of a direct confrontation or in a direct war with Venezuela. And I think that I often sit down and I'm trying to figure out, like, well, why is this necessary? And then when you look at sort of military industries in the United States, where a lot of US investments go, you see them amassing, of course, in West Asia, but also in the Caribbean region, because something else that I pointed out in my piece was that the reason drone warfare and these bombings are possible in the Caribbean is because they allowed a few months ago mercenaries and drone warfare to be used in Haiti. And so I think that what you have is sort of a new system or sort of a new area for military and weapons contractors to gain vitality in. And so that's why I think that this is a very dangerous time that we're in for the region, potentially becoming a war zone.
How would you categorize like the general response to these bombings? Because, you know, the justification, the legal justification the U.S. is doing is that these are not just traffickers, but narco terrorists, right? And that gives the U.S. kind of, by their own, rules, pretty broad purview into just conducting military operations wherever, right? I mean, it's pretty egregious that if the United States just kind of deems a craft to be associated with terrorism, that they can just bomb it. I mean, how would you categorize the general like response in the region to this, which just seems like, I don't know, you would think that people would be more upset, or at least government officials would be more upset because of the fact that like this is very unilateral.
So I think that over the past 2 years, we've just blatantly seen the U.S. engage in genocide and engage in all of these violations of international law. So I don't think that sort of law arguments make any sense. Going back to what I was saying about neo-colonial governments and how they don't necessarily need to be externally directed, but they're aligned. We've also seen, for instance, Israel bombing countries like Qatar, and they don't do anything to defend their populations. And I think that what you'll see is the same thing happening in the Caribbean, where they won't make this noise. On the one hand, you have people saying, oh, Venezuela is this oppressive regime and we must free the people. But then the U.S. State Department itself has said Venezuela is not a state. It is a narco trafficking organization. And when you say that Venezuela is not a state, it's a narco trafficking organization, what you are actually saying is that no one in Venezuela is a human being. And so therefore, if we bomb Venezuelans, it's justifiable, right? And so I think that what you see is sort of this broad-based dehumanization of Venezuelans themselves. I think Trump even came out saying, even fishermen are afraid to go on boats. And so he already points out that his own myths about narco trafficking is just a ruse. I think that right now, the Trump administration wants Venezuela to respond because we've already securitized, and when I say we, I mean the West has already securitized Venezuela so much to an extent that even though the United States have bombed 2 boats, have raided a tuna boat, if Venezuela does react, then you'll see people retroactively saying what the United States did was justified. And so I think that all of these sorts of events or phenomenon that we're witnessing at a time where international law doesn't matter for the United States, at a time when terrorist designations can, see people be executed anywhere really by the United States and its allies, that it's very worrying. And that's why it's even more scary and aggravating that the Caribbean prime ministers don't have a more vocal response against this. And in fact, some of the strongest states in the Caribbean, like Jamaica, Guyana, Trinidad, and Tobago, actually support these U.S. actions. And I singled those 3 out because, of course, Jamaica, Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago, and Barbados, they helped to found CARICOM. And so it says a lot that 3 of the 4 founders of CARICOM are cheering on war activities in the region.
Yeah, you also mentioned the complicity a number of these nations have with the U.S. imperialism and the support for Israel in particular. which I was interested to see. And, you know, I mean, that can't be popular. I don't imagine there's a huge desire to support Israel among Caribbean folks. Am I wrong about that?
So there isn't this huge desire. I think something else that's very important, or that we must understand about neocolonial states, is that they are also anti-democratic. And what I mean by this is that they all have these pretenses of legitimacy. So, you know, the Caribbean region, people say, oh yeah, they have free and fair elections. People can participate in the elections, but they have low political cultures and low engagement in their elections. What they're essentially saying is that a lot of these governments operate in farce ways that couldn't technically be categorized as democracies, but we call them a democracy anyway. When the Trinidad and Tobago prime minister came out saying, oh, it's in Trinidad's best interest to kill all of these cartels, people in her own country, people in her, even some of her supporters were like, you never consulted any of us about any of this, right? But she doesn't need to consult them, because that is the sort of farce of these sort of neocolonial states, is that even when they get that label of democracy, they are not accountable to their people. I think a lot of the West Asian states, because they tend to be, monarchies, people obviously look to them and say, oh, they're not democratic, or, you know, their people don't really have a say. But that is also true for the Caribbean. A lot of the Caribbean states are not democratic spaces. And I think, and I pointed this out in my piece, the sort of histories against enslavement, against Asian indentureship, against indigenous genocide and anti-colonial resistance for political independence makes people sort of gloss over the fact that a lot of these governments also have these sort of reactionary tendencies. And it's sort of that history of reaction that we're seeing being spotlighted today. And of course, it's not divorced from the politics of oil in the region as well.
Yeah, you know, you mentioned just a couple of the institutional actors, CARICOM, the Caribbean community. They sent a letter saying, hey, let us know next time you want to just, you know, blow people up extrajudicially in a boat. And CELAC, which is the Community of Latin American Caribbean States, Gustavo Petro, said they weren't able to issue a peace statement because of vetoes by some multiple Caribbean states. So it would be nice if it was just America forcing all these leaders to, against their will, kicking and screaming, but it seems like there's some synergy on the imperial front.
Yes, and I think that today our major crisis as people that inform other people is to talk to people about imperialism, and talk to people about imperialism as a sort of state orientation. Yes, the U.S. is sort of the leader of global imperialism when we talk about imperialism today, but there are also states that are aligned with that sort of U.S. foreign policy vision. And when I wrote this piece, they hadn't bombed the second boat yet in the Caribbean, but obviously they did yesterday, and no Caribbean leader was given the heads up. And so this whole, CARICOM will write a letter. A letter is not going to defend or protect people from being bombed, right? I even see, and you know, I keep mentioning the genocide in Palestine, but I even seen Qatar that was bombed, that they said like, oh, they're signing a new military agreement with the United States, so this won't happen again. It's like, no, these governments are aligned with the U.S. imperialist foreign policy vision. And oftentimes it's for investments. In 1983, when these states supported the U.S. invasion of Grenada, a lot of them thought that they would see more U.S. investments, and they didn't. And I think that that is the same calculation that Trinidad and Tobago, who today is the most vocal proponent of the U.S. murdering people in the region, also wants. They've been a longtime producer of oil. They see all of the investments going into Guyana because of Exxon. And I think that they're trying to capture their portion of the pie by aligning more vocally with the U.S. position. But the U.S. does not have any interest in helping to develop the Caribbean region. And so it's a dangerous game. It's a faulty game, but it will have real consequences for people in the region.
This has been Tamanisha John. Her piece, The Historical and Contemporary Role of Neocolonial Caribbean Governments in Supporting U.S. Militarism and Imperialism in the Region, in the Black Agenda report will be linked below. Tamanisha, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome, Left Reckoning patrons, to another post game. Hello, David.
Hey, friends.